You have probably heard it more times than you can remember. Stay positive. Look on the bright side. Everything happens for a reason. Don't dwell on negativity. Be grateful, smile, move on. And at first, these words sound harmless, even comforting. They promise relief. They offer a way out of pain without having to go through it. But over time, something about this constant demand for positivity begins to feel wrong. Not because hope is bad, but because denial wears the mask of hope and asks you to ignore what is real. Toxic positivity does not announce itself as oppression. It arrives as encouragement, as support, as good intentions. It tells you that your suffering is temporary, that your feelings are just a mindset problem, that if you think differently, everything will improve. And slowly, almost invisibly, it teaches you a dangerous lesson. That discomfort is a failure. That sadness is weakness. That anger is something to be corrected rather than understood. You learn very quickly which emotions are acceptable and which are not. Happiness is welcome. Gratitude is praised. Calmness is rewarded. But grief makes people uncomfortable. Fear is inconvenient. Anger disrupts harmony. And so you begin to filter yourself. You soften what hurts. You minimize what feels heavy. You tell yourself it's not that bad, even when it is. And each time you do this, you move a little further away from reality. This is where the danger begins. Because emotions do not disappear when they are ignored. They don't dissolve because you refuse to acknowledge them. They go underground. They become quieter, but stronger. More distorted. What you suppress consciously returns unconsciously. And when pain is not allowed to speak directly, it finds other ways to express itself. You may notice this as unexplained exhaustion, as irritability that seems out of proportion, as anxiety without a clear cause, as a numbness that feels worse than sadness. This is not because you are broken. It is because your inner life has been trained to perform happiness instead of processing truth. Toxic positivity does not heal pain. It postpones it. The modern world is especially fertile ground for this pattern. Social spaces are saturated with curated happiness, motivational slogans, and narratives of constant improvement. You are encouraged to brand your life as a success story, even while parts of you are quietly falling apart. And because everyone is doing it, the pressure feels normal. You learn to hide not only from others, but from yourself. Carl Jung understood that the psyche seeks wholeness, not happiness. Wholeness includes light and shadow, joy and despair, hope and fear. When part of this spectrum is rejected, the psyche becomes imbalanced. You cannot build psychological strength by amputating your inner life. Yet toxic positivity encourages exactly that. It tells you to cut off the uncomfortable parts and call it growth. This is why forced positivity feels fragile. It requires constant maintenance, constant vigilance. You must monitor your thoughts, correct your emotions, reframe your experiences endlessly. And beneath this effort lies a quiet fear. What if you stop pretending? What if you admit that something is wrong? What if you allow yourself to feel what you actually feel? Reality does not disappear because you ignore it. Pain does not resolve because you smile through it. Trauma does not heal because you declare yourself healed. What is denied does not go away. It accumulates. And one day, it demands attention in a way you can no longer control. Toxic positivity is seductive because it promises control over life. Think right, and you will feel right. Believe enough and reality will comply. But this belief turns against you the moment life becomes genuinely difficult. When loss happens, when failure arrives, when injustice strikes, suddenly your pain feels like a personal flaw, and instead of being supported, you feel ashamed for not coping correctly. This shame is the most corrosive part. It teaches you to mistrust your own emotional signals, to doubt your reactions, to question whether you are allowed to hurt. And once you lose trust in your own inner experience, you become easy to manage, easy to silence, easy to pacify with slogans instead of solutions. Ignoring reality is not strength, it is avoidance dressed as virtue. True resilience is not built by denying what hurts, but by facing it without distortion. And the more you are told to stay positive at all costs, the more important it becomes to ask what that positivity is protecting you from seeing. Because once positivity becomes an obligation, it stops being supportive and starts becoming coercive. You are no longer allowed to simply experience life as it is. You are required to interpret it in a way that makes others comfortable. Your pain must be reframed. Your anger must be softened. Your grief must be processed quickly and quietly, preferably without disturbing the atmosphere. And when you fail to do this, when reality refuses to cooperate with optimism, the problem is subtly shifted onto you. You begin to hear it everywhere. You attract what you think about. Your mindset creates your reality. Just stay positive and things will work out. These phrases sound empowering on the surface, but they carry a hidden accusation. If things are not working out, you must be thinking wrong. If you are still suffering, you must be doing something wrong internally. Reality is no longer allowed to be harsh, unjust, or painful on its own. It becomes a mirror of your supposed inner failure. This is where toxic positivity becomes psychologically dangerous. It collapses the distinction between inner responsibility and external reality. It turns misfortune into moral weakness. And in doing so, it isolates people at the exact moment they need connection the most. Because admitting pain no longer invites understanding. It invites correction. You may notice this in how people respond when you open up. They don't listen. They reframe. They rush to silver linings. They minimize. They tell you it could be worse. They remind you to be grateful. And while their intentions may be kind, the effect is silencing. Your experience is not met. It is redirected. And over time, you learn that honesty is unwelcome. Carl Jung warned that what is not consciously accepted becomes fate. When negative emotions are denied, they do not resolve. They turn into symptoms: chronic anxiety, depression, passive aggression, emotional numbness, a vague sense of unreality. The psyche finds a way to express what you refuse to acknowledge, and it often does so in forms that feel confusing and uncontrollable. This is why toxic positivity often leads not to happiness, but to fragility. A brittle inner state that can only function when conditions are good. The moment stress increases, the structure collapses. Because it was never built on truth. It was built on avoidance. Real psychological strength is flexible. It can bend. It can absorb pain without breaking. But forced positivity cannot bend. It shatters. The demand to ignore reality also creates a dangerous split inside you. One part of you knows what you feel. Another part tells you that feeling is unacceptable. This internal contradiction consumes energy. You are constantly monitoring yourself, correcting yourself, managing your emotional image. And the more you do this, the less capacity you have left to actually process what you are going through. You may feel this as exhaustion that rest does not fix, as a sense that you are always on, even when you are alone, as difficulty accessing genuine joy, because joy, like pain, requires openness. When you close yourself off to one end of the emotional spectrum, you dull the other as well. You cannot selectively numb. You either feel or you don't. The world prefers positivity because positivity is easy to manage. A positive person does not complain, does not disrupt, does not demand change. They adapt, they endure, they cope quietly. And while this may keep things running smoothly on the surface, it allows underlying problems to persist unchallenged. Toxic positivity does not just harm individuals. It protects unhealthy systems. When you are told to stay positive in the face of injustice, exploitation, or neglect, positivity becomes a tool of control. It shifts focus away from what needs to change and places responsibility back onto the individual. If you feel bad, fix your mindset. If you are struggling, try harder to be grateful. In this way, reality is never questioned. Only your reaction to it is. But the psyche cannot be healed through obedience to slogans. It heals through integration, through allowing the full range of experience to exist without judgment, through recognizing that anger can signal boundaries, that sadness can signal loss, that fear can signal danger. These emotions are not errors. They are information. And ignoring information does not make you wise. It makes you blind. True resilience begins when you stop asking yourself how to feel better and start asking what is actually happening. When you allow yourself to be honest about pain without immediately trying to transcend it. When you accept that some situations are genuinely difficult and that acknowledging this is not weakness, but clarity. Reality does not need your positivity. It needs your attention. And when you stop forcing yourself to be okay, something unexpected happens. The pressure eases. The inner conflict softens. You no longer have to pretend. You no longer have to perform emotional hygiene for others. You can finally respond to life as it is, not as it should be. This is not pessimism. It is maturity. The ability to hold complexity without denial. To face darkness without being consumed by it. To recognize that hope built on honesty is far stronger than optimism built on avoidance. Ignoring reality does not protect you. Facing it does. And the moment you give yourself permission to feel what is real, without correction or shame, you reclaim something essential. Your inner authority. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are no longer lying to yourself in order to survive. Because once you allow reality back in, without immediately trying to soften it, decorate it, or turn it into a lesson, something fundamental shifts inside you. The constant inner tension eases. The exhausting effort to appear okay relaxes. You are no longer fighting your own experience in order to be acceptable. And this is where real strength begins, not the fragile strength of constant optimism, but the grounded strength of psychological honesty. Reality, when faced directly, is not as destructive as you were taught to believe. Pain does not grow because you look at it. It becomes clearer, more defined, and what is clear can be worked with. What is denied cannot. When you stop forcing yourself to be positive, you make room for something far more stabilizing. Truth. Not dramatic truth, not catastrophic truth. Just the simple acknowledgement of what is actually happening inside you. And Carl Jung understood that healing does not come from replacing negative thoughts with positive ones, but from integrating what has been split off. The psyche does not seek happiness. It seeks wholeness. And wholeness requires that nothing essential is excluded. Not fear, not anger, not grief, not disappointment. These emotions are not obstacles to growth. They are the material of growth. When you allow yourself to feel without judgment, emotions begin to move. They no longer stagnate. Sadness becomes mourning instead of numbness. Anger becomes clarity instead of bitterness. Fear becomes caution instead of paralysis. But this transformation only happens when emotions are permitted to exist in their raw form. Toxic positivity blocks this movement. It freezes experience at the surface. You may notice that as you stop correcting yourself, your inner world becomes quieter. Not emptier, but calmer. Because you are no longer arguing with yourself about whether your feelings are justified. You stop asking, "Should I feel this way?" and start asking, "What is this feeling telling me?" This single shift restores inner authority. You are no longer outsourcing your emotional reality to slogans, advice, or expectations. This does not mean you become pessimistic or bitter. On the contrary, genuine optimism becomes possible again. Not the forced optimism that ignores reality, but the kind that emerges naturally after reality has been faced. Hope that is honest is resilient. It does not collapse when circumstances are difficult. It adapts. It endures. The world may resist this change in you. People who rely on positivity to avoid discomfort may feel uneasy when you speak plainly, when you refuse to sugarcoat, when you allow space for pain instead of rushing to reassurance. This discomfort is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are no longer participating in denial. You will notice that relationships change, Some become deeper, others fade. Conversations become slower, more real, less performative. You no longer feel the need to manage the emotional climate at all times. You allow silence. You allow complexity. And in doing so, you give others permission to do the same, even if they are not ready to accept it. The danger of toxic positivity is not that it encourages hope. It is that it replaces honesty with performance. And a life built on performance eventually collapses under the weight of what was never allowed to be felt. Reality always returns. The only question is whether it returns as insight or as breakdown. When you stop ignoring reality, you stop being fragile. You become flexible. You learn that you can feel pain without being destroyed by it, that you can acknowledge darkness without losing direction. That strength is not the absence of negative emotion, but the capacity to hold it without distortion. This is where maturity lives, not in constant brightness, but in depth, not in denying suffering, but in meeting it with clarity, not in pretending everything is fine, but in knowing what is not, and standing with yourself anyway. Toxic positivity asks you to abandon parts of yourself to stay comfortable. Reality asks you to stay present, even when it is uncomfortable. And only one of these paths leads to a life that is truly lived, rather than merely endured.